next we're going to hear from Dan Littmann. Dan also has a remarkable background as well. My degree is from computer science from Purdue University, but I spent most of my working period on my degree over at University of Michigan. And Dan has a degree from University of Michigan in history, but he also has then acquired an MBA at the University of Michigan as well. And after, this is following a period of working in the Air Force, and as I mentioned, one of the core indicators often we look at of people that have focus and achievement and aspirational direction from the military side and those from engineering and science sides of the house are often core indicators that they target interesting domains and take them quite seriously. And so Dan has been with Deloitte for 14 years and has an extensive background looking at the communications industry and consulting in the space, both on the user side as well in helping companies understand their new product design activities and leveraging mobile infrastructures as well. So help me welcome Dan Littmann.
Good evening. Thanks, Ben. And thanks to all you as well, especially for not snickering too loudly at the history degree. So that counts as well. So Pallav talked a little bit about disruption overall and into the industry and what's at stake. I'd like to double click a little bit on the network side of the house. So both the RAN and even on the wireline side when it comes to video. So not something we have to tell this audience too much, but of course, demand is growing at an exploding pace. It's really exceeded everyone's expectations, and at least our predictions are for a CAGR of 82%, really through 2015. If you look at what's driving this, it's basically devices and users and the applications. So for the longest time, of course, data it differs quite a bit from voice. Voice, a minute is a minute of use, right? In data, a minute can be anywhere from a very tiny amount of use to a huge amount of use in terms of streaming high-quality video, right? So that's one big difference in how data impacts overall the telecom, the carriers. The other, of course, is just the pace that it's growing and the dispersion that you see of usage across the network. So, think back to the voice of, nights and weekends and all of that. You can't really shape traffic that way in data. It looks different in different pockets of the network, across different geographies. It's much more unpredictable, and it's very hard to shape that and control the capacity. All that points to, an instability that others can take advantage of. Of course, when you look at what's driving the explosion of data, video is really the primary driver. It's over 50% of the data that's out there, and it's really two primary applications that are over 50% of the video that's out there, and it's Netflix and YouTube. And if it weren't those two, it would be someone else, and it'll just be video over and over again. So the net result of this is that you have an environment where data is growing much, much faster than revenue. Data growth at 113%, revenue growth at 6%. The equation leads to a declining yield. Right? So our numbers say, 9 cents per meg in 2012, going down to 2 cents per meg in 2015, and that trend continues. Right? So of course, those pricing models certainly favor the consumer in terms of contributing to declining yield. And the obvious conclusion there, I think, is, hey, well, we should monetize this data. We've got a product that people love. That's a good thing. We shouldn't look to say, hey, dissuade people from, going onto the network. We should say, how do we monetize that? But of course, as you guys well know, that's more difficult than it sounds in an era of unlimited pricing plans and what consumers have gotten used to. So there are limits to what you can do on that. The good news, I think, is if you look at being able to control for the massive amount of data growth, is that geographically, very little land area generates the vast majority of traffic and the vast majority of revenue and profit. Right? So we've said close to 70% is generated of revenue is generated by about 10% of the land area. So when you're thinking about the choices about the carriers are facing about whether to build out more and more capacity to basically adhere to this and to take that declining yield, there's a limited geographical area where they're going to have to build that out. And that's when things like, obviously, the small cells and Wi-Fi offload become very, very important. So I am going to apply my history degree a little bit here and look at the history of, you know, in 1994 to 2006 versus what we see 2006 to the, you know, the next 12 or years of 14 years, not math, of 2018, right? So, and this is kind of before and after. From a device standpoint, you know, it's 13x, more and more devices under the market, users, not, per device. It's going to grow a little more slowly over the next period. Right, from a usage perspective, right, usage has increased 6x. Now it's upwards of 45 to 70x. Right, from an ability on the supply side to gain the capacity, you can look at limited compression gains going forward. Technology will probably get a 5x to 7x gain. From a spectrum standpoint, I think you'll see the historical trend continue after a lot of wrangling in Washington to still get a 3x gain. But you know, the big blue bar in there where it says Wi-Fi's role, right, an offload role, it makes a lot of sense to start, you know, basically moving on to Wi-Fi for a lot of the users. And that's where you see some of these more disruptive models, or at least their attempts to be disruptive, come into play. It just, when you have demand that exceeds some of the supply that's out there right now, you'll always lead to some of the new business models. Okay? And some of these established players and some of the newer players are indeed trying that. But I'll go over to exactly what Pallav said as well, is that there's a control mechanism here as to whether the incumbents will let this happen. And it really is up to them to a certain extent. Will they build out capacity and provide the, you know, and their own offload capacity and all alternative small cells to basically leverage and control the device and keep them on the network and being able to monetize them that way, think of traffic as a good thing? Or will they basically say, hey, we want to be able to limit the capital investment, maximize on some of the cash flow, and you know, allow some of these other models to come into play? When you look at video and the wireline, it's of course a very different scenario. Before you had a ecosystem in a great amount of change. Here you have high fragmentation, but a very stable ecosystem that I think is much more ripe for disruption. So even as you say that, you know, overall subscription video seems to be doing just fine, very stable, so starts to have little declines, but some of those are, you know, governed by the economy. You do have an over-the-top environment that is small right now, but from a usage standpoint is taking off. And this is some of the example of the fragmentation that will go on. And of course, the content providers are the big difference here, and they've been very adept in controlling this fragmentation. But you know, to a certain extent, they're also incenting the move to OTT. They're incenting it not only by, you know, offering consumers a very limited amount of channels that they actually watch, but forcing them to take many more at increasingly higher prices. But that also incents their distribution channels, the cable companies, the satellite companies, the telcos, to make a move as well, because they're the ones who are having to pay the increasing content fees as well. And what I think people start putting together, both on the device side and on the carrier and distribution side, the network side, is that ecosystems start to matter, right? It's ecosystems around mobile devices, around in the home, the coordination with the RAN, with the wireline, with Wi-Fi offload, bringing it back all to that. And you see kind of here, you know, the real successful companies have more and more devices that are in the home. So these are just number of devices in each household, and you know, there's many households that now have, you know, 4, 5, more than that, of Apple or Samsung devices. And I think that leads, this is a bit of a version of something Pallav showed as well, that leads to say that these ecosystem players, right, on the device side especially, have actually captured a majority of the growth over the past 5 years. So even if you look at the carrier revenues over the past 5 years and the amazing growth they've seen, a lot of that money is filtered through to the device manufacturers, to the Apples and Samsungs of the world, through both subsidy models and just outright purchases. So at that point, I'll turn it back over to Ben.
Yeah, certainly the history notion is extremely important. I found among the biggest mistakes of general managers is a failure to appreciate or get a running start at looking at the future. And that discipline and that you learned in your history is very important to looking at effective running starts at predicting trends and our future environments and looking at displacements and disruptions. And clearly, Dan mentioned and we want to keep looking forward at issues like OTT and disruptive nature and also the apportionment of allocation of interest in those looking forward to leveraging OTT and those that have fought it for so long that have to embrace it at some point in their future moving forward. So let's keep that in mind, those figures as well. And also looking at the density and nexus of devices in proximity areas like the household, or what I call captive area networks, looking at your car, looking in an elevator, looking in a store, that the marriage of the ideas of the proliferation of sensors change the dynamics of usage patterns and open up new commerce initiatives, especially where authentication and attestation come about, new commerce is possible. And so we don't want to look at these just from the operating infrastructure standpoint, but from what they make possible in our lives and in commerce going forward. We're going to hear next from Peter Jarich.